chaplaincy, we've been here for quite a while, but it's been the last 2 years where we've seen a real need for chaplaincy and so many open doors. In fact, one of our problems is that how many hours in the day that we have to be able to go into places and, you know, the volunteers and things like that. So I'm hoping that, I don't need to hope, I know it's going to happen, that over the course of the morning, you'll just get lots of sort of tasters in all kinds of ways. So just relax, enjoy, chat with each other, and we're just really privileged that Helen has driven all the way down from Birmingham today. I've lost her. Where is she? Oh, you're on the front table that everyone's avoiding. All the way from Birmingham today to be with us. And Susanna and myself, we kind of saw Helen in action on a film clip and things, and we went, oh, wouldn't that be amazing? So, Helen, please come forward. And just before you start, can I just say a prayer for you as well? Just take a moment to pause. Heavenly Father, we thank you that at the core of all that we do is you. And just help us to remember that and to look to you in all things. And I do just pray for Helen this morning. I thank you for her ministry across chaplaincy and the way that she inspires so many people, that you will give her the right words for this time and occasion and be a real inspiration in your name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to put the books on the floor, I think. It's lovely to be with you. Oh, gosh, I'm very high. Goodness me. I feel like I'm very, very high up. I thought that Noelle was going to say how lovely it is to have a Lord Lieutenant who is so handsome, but she said hands-on. I thought that's what she was going to say. I'm not going to comment any further on that. Thank you for having me. As Noelle said, I've come down from Birmingham this morning. My only main challenge was getting off the M25 and onto the A3, which took forever to do. However, because I set off early enough, I made it, so that was great. This topic is one that's very close to my heart and actually part of my everyday job. So perhaps if I explain about myself a little bit first, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do this morning. So I work as a primary healthcare chaplain. So I work in a large GP surgery in Birmingham, which is the GP surgery in the country that pioneered primary healthcare chaplaincy. So I'm very much aware that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants in my role. There are people who have gone before me and GPs who have been very committed to providing spiritual care as part of their whole person care offer in the practice. It's a real privilege. It's probably a little different from the role that many of you have, in as much as I'm based in the practice. And the people I see, I tend to call them patients because that's what everyone in the practice calls them. And I'll try not to keep defaulting to patients, but that tends to be my word, but that won't probably be your word for the people that you speak to. But they get referred, usually by their GP, perhaps because of a particularly difficult time they're having in their life. Maybe they're depressed, maybe they have anxiety, maybe they're experiencing loss or change, a difficult diagnosis, or they're supporting a family member in that kind of situation. And they are referred into our service as an alternative, really, to being referred to mental health services. And so we offer, our offer is part of the talking therapies offer that's in the surgery. So we have the privilege of being able to sit with people for a number of sessions, which might be a little different from your encounters, which may be more one-off encounters, I don't know. But hopefully we'll be able to adapt what I'm talking about so that you can apply it into your setting. I very much hope so. So part of what I'm doing, because I'm working in the NHS, is seeking to have conversations with people in those situations that I mentioned, facing those experiences, but that are spiritual conversations. If they were referred to a mental health worker, it probably wouldn't be a spiritual conversation. And so I need to understand what the difference is and how can I get spirituality on the table? How can I get it so that we can talk about spirituality? So, excuse me. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm hoping it's going to be a kind of collaborative experience. There's going to be some group work for you to do along the way in breakout groups. And I hope that perhaps as well, when you go from here, you'll find lots to talk about together and lots to inspire each other with in terms of how could I take that little bit into the work that I'm doing, or I really like that little bit, I wonder how I could apply that. Maybe find someone who's going to support you. If you want to have a try, if you want to try some of these models that I'm going to introduce to you, you could maybe tell someone, I think I'm going to have a go at speaking in this way when I go out to do my work today. Will you pray for me? Will you help me? So hopefully it'll cause us all to grow and all to have more tools in the toolkit, I think. You're already really committed to providing spiritual care to the people that you meet. But not everyone we meet has a faith. In Birmingham, in my practice, it's a very diverse community. I meet people who have no faith at all, but I also meet people who have very different faiths from mine. So I work with Muslims, I work with Hindus and Buddhists, with Jews. I work with people who are refugees and asylum seekers who maybe didn't have a Christian faith, but whatever faith they did have, they've lost it because their experience has been so terrible. And they don't know where God went, or whether God went anywhere, or what to do about that. Some people who have a Christian faith, but from a different tradition from mine. So there's a whole range of people that we meet, but everyone, I believe, has spiritual needs. Everyone is searching for meaning and purpose and hope in their life. Everyone is looking for joy. And I think those are our spiritual needs, connection, all of those kinds of things that actually go to the core of who we are and who we want to be. So those are the kinds of conversations that I'm hoping we can unpack today. I represent as well the Association of Chaplains in Primary Care, or Association of Chaplains, I should say, in GP practice. So it's the ACGP, Association of Chaplains in General Practice. And I'll refer to some of their work as I go along. I'm on the board of that organisation and support the setting up of primary care chaplaincy in GP surgeries all around the country, and provide some training as well for people to come to, which if you're interested in that training, there's a 2-day training coming up. It's online, and I can tell you about that later as well. I'm going to talk about some patient experiences. I will be describing some stories that some of the people that I've worked with have told me. So the names have been changed, some of the details have been changed to maintain confidentiality, but it's always really interesting, isn't it, to flesh it out with some real-life illustrations. So let's get started. I'm going to put my slides up, somebody. Nick, is it Nick? There we go. Thank you. So the first thing I thought would just be start very basically, is to think about, if we're talking about having spiritual conversations with people who maybe don't have a religious background, perhaps what we first need to think about is what is a conversation in the first place. And it sounds a bit silly, but I think it's quite good to get started with what do we think a conversation is, even though that sounds a bit simple. And here are some definitions from the different, first the Oxford English Dictionary and then the Cambridge Dictionary. So a conversation is a talk, and actually an informal talk usually, between two or more people, in which news and ideas get shared. And Cambridge puts it, thoughts, feelings, ideas, and questions being asked and answered. So it's a two-way thing. Could be lots of people, but it's not a monologue. It's not a one-way thing. It's a dynamic interaction. It's an exchange of views, an exchange of thoughts and feelings and ideas. Lots of ways that we can hold conversations, aren't there? We've been having conversations while we've been having our tea and coffee. This morning you have conversations when you buy your groceries. You have conversations when you're in your family, maybe you're around the meal table. So there's lots of different ways that we have conversations. And when you're out being chaplains, you're having conversations. There's an exchange going on. You're doing some talking and some listening. The other person is doing some talking and some listening. So it's not a lecture. It's not a monologue. It's not an information impartation, it's an exchange. And I think that's really important to remember, because it helps us to know how to listen. If we're listening in order to enter into an exchange, rather than to either affirm or correct what we're hearing, we come about it a little differently, I think. So that's what I want to encourage us to think about. I think it's about paying attention and listening really, really well. And what I want to do as we go through the morning is help us to think about what it is we're listening for. I trained as a counsellor. For many years I worked as a psychotherapist. And really I was trained to listen for pain and problems. I mean, that's what I was supposed to listen out for. So people might disguise their pain and their problems in different ways. My job was to find that and help a person explore it. But as I've come into chaplaincy, I've realised I want to listen for something different. I want to listen for those spiritual needs, which, again, many people don't articulate them. They don't know how to articulate them. They might not have the language. But if I pay close attention, I will hear maybe a desire, a question, where has hope gone? Or what is the meaning of it all? And they might not use those words. They might not ask those questions overtly, but those needs are there. And if I'm listening for those, I'll hear them. So then that leads us to what is spirituality then, if we're going to talk about spiritual needs. And here are some secular definitions of spirituality. The first is from the Royal College of Psychiatry, that they mulled for a long time, they debated together for a long time, how are we going to describe spirituality? Because they wanted to understand it in the context of psychiatry. And this is where they've landed, at least until recently. So spirituality is something everyone can experience. It helps us to find meaning and purpose in the things we value. I think that's a really nice way to put it. And finding out what do people value is a good way in to a spiritual conversation. Spirituality can bring hope and healing in times of suffering and loss. And it encourages us to seek the best relationship with ourselves, with others, and with what lies beyond. So spirituality comes out beyond us. It's not an inward or a self-centered thing. It's often seeking, how do I relate to other people around me? How do I relate to the world? How do I relate to God? How do I relate to the universe? Many of the people that I work with might not talk about God, but they too talk about the universe quite a bit. Or they'll say, everything happens for a reason. And they're trying to connect with whatever the reason is. So it's something that's beyond ourselves. And then this second quote comes from a book about nursing. So this was put forward by, I think, the chief nurse quite a long time ago, saying spirituality is a quality that goes beyond religious affiliation, strives for reverence and awe, meaning and purpose, even in people who don't believe in God. The spiritual dimension tries to be in harmony with the universe and strives for answers about the infinite. It comes essentially into focus in times of emotional stress, physical or mental illness, loss, bereavement, and death. I'm not sure it does only come into focus, especially at those times. I think it's around for people, actually, a lot of the time. I wonder if, like me, you've ever struggled to search for meaning in things. If things have happened in your life and you thought, what was the point of that? What was the purpose of that? What am I supposed to learn from that? Am I supposed to learn anything? Is there anything I can gain from this experience? How do I make it stop? Did I cause it to start in the first place? Those kind of things that we mull over might be called spiritual questions within us, I think. So I wonder whether having a spiritual conversation is not so much about trying to find something, it's about acknowledging that we're searching for it, we're looking for it, and just approaching everyone, actually, with the understanding that everyone is looking for meaning and purpose. Everyone is. They are. Everyone is. We all are. Introduced the first book that I want to tell you about. This book, Psycho-Spiritual Care in Healthcare Practice. It's a collection of essays. It's not a whole book. It's edited by Guy Harrison. And there's a chapter, a whole chapter. I just like the chapters. Sometimes I'm drawn to books just because of the title, or I flick through and I like the chapter headings, and I think, oh, I'll just mull on the chapter heading. I don't need to read all the words. I just like that phrase. And this guy called Steve Nolan, the chapter is called "Searching for Identity in Uncertain Professional Territory." And I think working as a Christian chaplain in the NHS, that sounds like me, searching for identity in uncertain professional territory. And it goes on to talk quite a lot about what it looks like to work in a secular setting. And all of us are working in a secular setting, really, aren't we? Because if we're out there, the community is not necessarily religiously affiliated. It's not necessarily thinking itself in those terms. So he talks about struggling with what he calls the endless recycling of the assertion that meaning-making is the essential component of spirituality. That's a long sentence. He struggles with the idea that what we've got to do all the time is find the answers. And that's difficult to do, particularly in healthcare, and particularly in mental health care. It's quite hard. And maybe in a brief conversation on the street or in the shops or in a prison, it's also quite hard to think, right, the goal is that we've got to find the meaning here. We might not, but we might be able to have a conversation that enables us all, both people in the conversation, to think about what it is we're searching for. So that's a nice book if you're into healthcare. You may not be, but this is something else that the guy who wrote that chapter, Steve Nolan, said about spirituality. He said it's a way of being and experiencing that comes through awareness of a transcendent dimension that is characterized by certain identifiable values in regard to self, others, nature, life, and whatever one considers to be the ultimate. So he argues that what we need is a lived experience definition. What's it really like for us? Something phenomenological rather than just an abstract way of looking at things. It's a way of being with one another. So what if for some, spirituality means acknowledging that what can't be seen isn't all there is? Those of us who have a faith know, don't we, that it's not just what we can see and touch and feel that matters. There's a whole other dimension, isn't there? There's more to it than can be seen and touched and felt. And perhaps it's about acknowledging that in our conversations. Perhaps non-religious spiritual care isn't really about theological concepts, but it's more about just the human experience of somehow being aware that we are more than what we can see and feel and touch. Or maybe being aware that there is more than. I like that idea of more than. There's more than what's directly in front of us to be attached to, really. Don't panic if you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is getting deep. It's only going to get shallower from here on in, probably. I'm just trying to... It's difficult. We're grappling with the terms. We've got to understand what the terms are before we can go any further, really. I'm just going to jump my order around a little bit. Because I want us to do some group work, but I'm just going to skip a slide and come back to it in a minute, because I just want to carry on and thinking about conversations, thinking about how we have conversations. Chiefly, we have words to have a conversation, whether they are verbal, whether they're out loud and verbalized, or whether they're signed, or whether they are in some way acted out, or they're just the thoughts we think. There tend to be words attached to conversations. And so we need to have an idea, what kind of words might we need if we're going to have spiritual conversations? So I came up with some of these words here, all of which I think, when I thought about it, are quite positive or quite affirming of spiritual hope. So we might be talking about where is meaning, or we might be talking about reality or faith or creativity, longing, those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of words that I use in my conversations, my spiritual conversations. What are you longing for? What are you hoping for? Who does you good? Where do you feel your most self? You know, those kinds of questions help people unlock a sense of their spirituality. So I need some words. But if you look at that slide, you might think, well, there's some words missing here. There are words that aren't there. And perhaps I need another slide with words like lost or hopeless or scared or the abyss. It's a word that comes up, or darkness, or feeling out of control, or stuck, or doubt. There's a reason why I didn't make a slide with those words on it, actually. Maybe it's like, but it doesn't have to be like that. Those are genuine spiritual searching words, aren't they? So I think I will add that slide at some point to help us have those conversations. And so during the rest of the morning, we're going to be thinking maybe about what words do you use? And we're going to look at some models of having spiritual conversations as we go along. And you'll see that there are words that we use for those models. So conversation is about an exchange of ideas. So that's important in a conversation. But the other thing that's important in a conversation is silence. Letting there be time for things to just soak in a little bit. Not feeling as the practitioner, if you like, as the chaplain, releasing ourselves from feeling we've got to have an answer or we've got to know what to say next. It's okay if we don't know what to say next. It's okay if neither me nor the person I'm seeking to help knows what to say next. And sometimes it's okay to acknowledge that. Sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know what to say next. That's okay. And that helps people to feel safe with their uncertainty. If I'm not frightened of their uncertainty, if I'm not frightened of the endless whatever it is that can't be described, and I can sit with it or stand with it or just be near it, that encourages people hugely. It gives people a lot of hope. Just come to my mind actually now, a person that I've been working with for a few sessions, and I just saw her last week. She's very lost and very broken. She's lived through a life of abuse, appalling abuse. And really, until very recently, her only way of relating to the world and everybody in it was just to be furious all the time, really enraged and mad. That's her defense. So she alienates a lot of the helpers that come her way because she just yells at them and shouts at them and asks them what do they think they're doing, and she wants explanations that they can't always give, and she gets really cross. And then she got referred into our service, and she spent a few sessions just chatting with me. And after about 3 of our sessions, actually, she was telling me about all this anger. And I said, well, you don't get cross with me. You've not been cross here. Why don't you get cross with me? Why don't you get cross with me? And she said, well, you're different because you'll just listen to it. You're not trying to do anything about it. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I don't need to get cross with you. I'm sorry, I always go off piste and tell stories. I said to her, have you ever given yourself a hug? She just froze like this in the chair. Oh, no. No. Obviously, she's had terrible negative experiences of touch, negative experiences of what isn't affection. So she just... And I said to her, would you be willing to try something with me? Could we do an experiment? She goes, okay. All right then. So I just invited her to put her hands out like this. And then put one hand here and one hand here and just stroke her shoulders like that. And when I told her, I said, this is what we're going to do, and she looked at me as if I'd gone mad. And I said, well, how about it? I'll do it, you do it, let's do it together, let's see what happens. So she had a go. Went like this. And she said, my pacemaker's slowed down. Should I feel calm? Ooh, never felt calm before. Isn't that really interesting. And to be honest, I didn't know what to do next. But how do we stop this? So we're both sitting there like this. Now what do we do? Because I thought, well, we can't just go back to, we can't just do that. So I thought, right, okay, what we'll do is we'll just gradually come down like this, and we'll just gradually feed out like this, and we'll just gradually stop it like that. She went, oh, okay, that was nice, I can do that. And she has since commented to me that she's been practicing that at home, and she's calmer than she's ever been. I think that was a spiritual conversation because that helped her to understand that there's a way to be loved that she'd never experienced. The other thing you need to know about me is I cry easily. So when I tell stories, I do blub, excuse me. But I mean, how amazing was that? And she said to me, no one's ever listened to me like this before. And even in passing, you can meet people and you can have an impact because you can be different from how anyone else pays attention to them. The way you pay attention to the person on the checkout in the supermarket. Hi, how's your day? What time do you finish? How's it going? You look a bit frazzled, are you all right? Nobody speaks to people like that. But if we're incarnational, let's say we're carrying the life of Christ with us into those settings. It's the kind of thing Jesus did, isn't it? And it just opens up some sort of hope, I think. Looking at the time. I want to just talk about a couple of models, and then I'm going to put you into groups for a little bit of a chat together. I'll go back to one of my group questions. This idea of respectful curiosity, I think I coined this phrase, but when it's kind of so long ago that I don't know whether I copied it from somebody and now it just feels like mine, or whether I did actually coin it, but I'm having it anyway. So I think it's useful when we're having conversations to be respectfully curious about the person. Try it in your coffee breaks. Be respectfully curious. It's different from being interrogative. We're not asking questions to get to know and find out. We're just curious. That's really interesting. Do you want to tell me a bit more about that? How fascinating. Or, gosh, I'm sorry you had that experience. Do you want to say a bit more about it? So we're just curious. And I think this is a really great way into conversations, actually, with anyone, whether it's aiming to be a spiritual conversation or not, to be respectfully curious. At ACGP, we do a 2-day online training, as I said, and we look at this little diagram. I don't know if any of you, has anyone done our ACGP training? Yes, so some of you will be familiar with this diagram. So this is the diagram that we use to try to describe human beings. So the red-shaped oval on the outside represents the body, which is the part that can be seen. It's the part that is experienced by everybody else. So the only way that you and I can know each other, really, is through our physical selves. I hope I'm not disillusioning anyone here, but you are not mind readers. You cannot see anyone's thoughts. And you can't see anyone's feelings, actually. And you can't see a person's spirit. You can't touch or grasp a person's mood except through the body. So it's through the body that we know each other. Now, that's the bit we see. It's the bit we touch. It's the bit we hear. So you can sense something about what I might be thinking or feeling by looking at me. Where are my shoulders? Do I have a smile on my face? You can sense something about the mood I might be in. Am I like this? Or am I like this? But it's all through the body. It's only the body that we can relate with. It's only the body we see and touch and hear and experience. How near or far are we? How loud or quiet are we? How still or fidgety are we? Those kinds of things are all in the body. But what we know is inside the body, there are all these things that we can't see. There are our thoughts, and these other loops are to do with those. So there are cognitions, what are we thinking? What are we feeling? What are we sensing? What's going on spiritually? All of that's going on inside. And I think the art of a spiritual conversation is to be curious about the bits we can't see and invite a person to bring them into the visible, the audible, the tangible. So just giving a space where those things can be practiced. There's a lovely book, this book, Kurt Thompson. If any of you know Kurt Thompson, really, really recommend him. He's an American Christian psychiatrist, and he's written some wonderful material over the years. And he also has a podcast called the Being Known podcast, which I heartily recommend to anyone who's interested in spirituality and mental health, or spirituality and mental well-being in any kind of context. He's really good. But he wrote this book, The Anatomy of the Soul. Isn't that a lovely title? See, I bought the book for the title, actually, Anatomy of the Soul. And it starts out by describing the way the brain works. So he's into neuropsychology, and he's kind of developed a field called neurofaith, which I love. The idea that what's going on in our brains, what's going on in our nervous system, relates to faith, and can relate to faith, and can relate to our spirituality. So you know how if something is going on in our body, say we're sick, those of us who have faith might say, well, we can believe that God can heal that. Or we know what's going on there. So if you have a pounding heart and a high blood pressure and you're sweating a bit, you might be able to detect from your body that there's stress going on. And I might be able to pray for you to calm that down, or I might be able to give you some fun things to do to calm that down. And we often are relating well to the idea that God is interested in healing the body, and God knows how the body works. He understands how bones break or how things grow, or, he understands all of that. But then when it comes to the mind, when it comes to our neuropsychology, often as people of faith, we go, oh, that's for the experts. I mean, what on earth does God know about that? And they've got to go to somebody else to talk about those things. But Kurt Thompson argues, if God made us, if God made all of us, he made all that as well. He made our central nervous system. He made our prefrontal cortex. He understands what's going on neurologically, and so we can apply faith to those things as well. And it works. It's just wonderful, isn't it? So be aware. So this book is brilliant, and he talks about that. So at the beginning, you get, if I can find you a picture, he talks about the brain. He tells you how the brain develops from before birth, all the way into adulthood, the right and left sides of the brain, top down, bottom up, all that stuff. If you're a neurologist, you'll know what. He talks about all of that, and then he applies Christian scriptures and faith to those parts of ourselves that we might not normally think of. So recommend that book. It's a great one to have a look at. So being respectfully curious about what we can't see, and believing, trusting that God is as interested in all of that as he is in the outside. So next time you're meeting someone in the street when you're doing your chaplaincy, or you're out on a cold night looking after people who aren't very well, remember they've got a whole inner world that you can't see, and all that stuff is made by God. Therefore, God's got something to say. God can reach all of that stuff that you can't reach. And sometimes you can use the body to help them reach it. Sometimes it's just a touch. Or how close do we get? Or how far away, respectfully, do we stay? So using our body to reach the invisible, it's just lovely. It's just a gift, isn't it, that we can give to one another. I'll tell you about a young man that I met. He was referred into my service because his grandma had died. He was a man in his early 30s, maybe. He got a new little baby girl, and he adored his grandmother. He had adored her, and she died, and it felt like his world had kind of all started to disintegrate a little bit. He didn't know what to do. And he felt a bit guilty because he was supposed to be really thrilled about this little baby girl that he'd got, who he did love to pieces, but he couldn't quite find the joy because he was grieving. He liked his job, he loved his partner. On the outside, he said, oh, what's the matter with me? Life is going well. Life is really going well. But he was deeply, deeply missing Grandma. So I asked him about Grandma. I just respectfully, curiously said, "Tell me about Grandma." And out it all came. How she had loved him unconditionally, how she didn't judge him, how she was the source of fun in his life. And then he started to talk about his parents, how Mum and Dad were critical of him. Often he felt he wasn't coming up to the mark, but not with Grandma. Not with Grandma. And he suddenly began to realise she had been giving him a sense of worth. That now that she was gone, he didn't quite know how to find it anymore. So just being curious about Grandma was really lovely. And he began to talk about being anxious that he might be a disappointment to people, that he might disappoint his partner, that he might not be a good enough dad, because those were the messages that often came from his parents. So we were then able to talk about, well, let's think about what Grandma's given you that you can keep. Think about her messages. Let's see if we can make those messages louder, even though she's not here anymore. And he came back to one of his sessions and he said he'd had an epiphany. He said he'd realised that as an adult, as a man with a good job and a loving partner and a brand new baby, he didn't actually need to seek approval from his parents anymore. He'd never realised he didn't need to get it from there. Because he'd realised he had been getting it from Grandma and not from Mum and Dad anyway, and that had been sustaining him. And now he could have it from his partner and his daughter, that affirmation, that belief. But then he said, but maybe I'm just worth it anyway. Maybe I could just love me because I'm just me. What do you think, Helen? And I said, sounds like a plan. We never talked about God. We never got to that. He didn't really want to talk about God. I did ask him if I could pray for him. And he said, yes, please. He didn't want me to pray for him there and then, but he was quite happy to be on my prayer list. But at the end of our sessions together, he did say, I feel like I've had a spiritual awakening. Those were his words. I feel like I've had a spiritual awakening. And that awakening was, I've got value. I matter. I'm worth it. And it took just time to process that message had always been in his life, but he didn't quite know how to find it because it had always come from Grandma, and what was he going to do without her? So just being respectfully curious is very valuable, I think. This is another diagram that we use on our ACGP training. And again, Kurt Thompson talks a lot about integration. These phrases that people use, they say things like, I just feel so lost. Or they're describing a particular way of behaving and they say, this just isn't me. This isn't me, really. You know, maybe they drink too much. This isn't me. I don't really want to be someone who drinks too much. I'm not someone who, I don't want to be shouting at my kids all the time. This isn't who I am. Isn't that important? That's a really important spiritual phrase. This isn't who I am. I'm looking to find, who then am I? So we love this diagram at ACGP. So that straight line is the who am I, really. And I'm going to look at, after the coffee break, at some of the models of how we find this. So that straight line is my values, my hopes, my standard, if you like, who I really, at my core, believe I am, or I want to be, or I hope to be. Who am I in the world? And then the red line is life as we live it. And we are at our best, we are at our most integrated, probably our most spiritually healthy self, when the life we're living matches closely to the values we espouse. That's when we're really doing well and we're at our best. And that's what I think Jesus wants to do in our lives. That's what he does in us. Because life can sometimes cause this gap to open up. So maybe things we've done to ourselves, maybe choices we've made, or maybe things that have happened to us, we've veered off somehow. And that's when we start using language like, this just isn't me. This isn't who I want to be. This isn't what I thought it would ever be. I never thought it would be like this. Those kinds of words describe a gap that has opened up between who we really at our core believe ourselves to be and what's happening in our life. And that can be over a long period of time. That can be just the way we're living. Or it might be a split second. Someone cuts you up on the motorway when you're trying to get off the M25 onto the A3. Grr. That's a gap. Because I'm not really a grr kind of person. You know, I'm, by the grace of God, someone who can exhibit the fruit of the Spirit. But grr. Quick grr. It only got as bad as a grr. It wasn't any worse than that. But that's a gap. So it can be a short gap, or it can be life has done something to us to separate us from those values that matter. And I think the art of a spiritual conversation is to help to identify what the gap is. And then that little wavy green line is the way back. And the way back might be a bit windy. And for those of us with religious language, we might talk about repentance, or we might talk about restoration, forgiveness. For those who don't have spiritual language for it, we might talk about repair, mending, changing our minds, thinking about choices. How do we get back so that we can close the gap? Another young man that I worked with, he said he really believed that the important thing in life was a stable and secure home life, and it was really important to him that he could provide that for his family. He had a great job, he was earning good money, and it was really important to him to be a good, solid provider and to be able to bring security to his family. That mattered, that was his straight line. But he'd gone into the corporate world, he was climbing the corporate ladder. He was spending more and more and more hours at work, more and more time away. His life was taking him away from the family that he wanted to bring security to. So he was bringing the money, but he wasn't bringing himself. So his wife and his children were quite well provided for, but they hardly saw him at all. His marriage was beginning to suffer. And he hadn't quite worked it out. He said, I don't know what's the matter with me. He'd been offered a very important promotion. He got a choice to make. But he didn't know why he felt so out of sorts. He'd gone to see the doctor. He says, Doctor, I think I'm depressed. I don't know what's the matter with me. I can't sleep. I'm just miserable all the time. I can't understand why I'm miserable all the time, because I've got this great family, I've got this great job, I've got a lovely car, we have nice holidays. What is wrong with me? And through our conversation, he realized what is wrong with me is that what really matters isn't how I'm living. And all credit to that man, I'm so proud of him. He decided not to take the promotion. His bosses didn't understand it. His colleagues thought he was mad. He became a subject of a little bit of ridicule in the workplace. They just thought, you're throwing away your chances. What the heck are you doing? You know, this won't come round again, you know. You won't get this opportunity ever again. But he worked out, I'm going to cry again, he worked out, that's not the opportunity I want. The opportunity I want is to put my kids to bed and read them stories and be able to be with them. Excuse me, I'm love God. He worked it out because I was curious. What do you think is the matter with you? And I showed him the gap. I did it like this. And he goes, oh, wow, that's exactly it. But first of all, we had to find out what were the values. So this is at the heart of spiritual conversations, I think. He needed to find a way back. I'm just going to go back a few slides and ask you to go into groups and have a think about this subject. I haven't really been talking very much about God yet, and we're here to talk about how do we open up spiritual conversations or spiritual understanding with people who also don't talk about God. So I want you to think about it in your groups. I'm not sure how the groups work. I think you've been assigned to groups. So these are the questions for you for about 20 minutes, if you wouldn't mind. What differences do you think there are between people who are seeking meaning and purpose in life in the context of a religious faith and the people who are also seeking those things but without that interest in religious faith. How do they present differently? How do they look and sound that's different when they meet you, who is a person of faith? And how do you respond to them differently? Do you respond differently to people who have faith with those searching questions than you do to people without faith with searching questions, without being evangelistic? So it's not that I respond to them by telling them about Jesus. That's not what we're interested in. It's how do they present differently, and how does that make you feel in terms of the way you respond to them? So are you coming to help me with groups? Is that why you're hovering, Noelle? Thank you. So we're going to have about 20 minutes in our groups, and then perhaps take a little tiny bit of feedback before we break for coffee. So you don't all have to speak in the feedback, but if I will just open that, I'll let you know now that there will be an opportunity for different ones if you want to just pipe up after you've had a chat. Okay, folks. Time's up, so that's enough time to chat about those questions. Just to make sure that you were chatting about those questions and not, planning your Easter outreach, we're going to take a bit of feedback. So, Susanna's got a mic. So I just want to know, just like to hear from one or two of you, what were you talking about? What were your thoughts? No right or wrong. I am respectfully curious about what it was you were saying. And so are all the rest of us. So does anybody want to just wave their hand and I keep wanting to call Susanna. I want to keep calling you Hosanna. I've got there's a little baby in my church been born, and her name is Hosanna. And so when I think of your name, I think, I'm going to call you Hosanna. Susanna. Yeah. So it's got the mic. Anyone? Oh yeah, here we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. We were just talking about finding common ground with people, which is very difficult sometimes. A sense of humour as well.
Yep.
Most important of all, your experiences.
Well done. Yeah. Sharing experiences. Finding common ground is really interesting, isn't it? And sort of in any rapport, if we want to build any rapport with people, there's got to be something where we can find a connection. And that's why I think it's so important that conversations are about exchanges. So we are really interested in what is the other person saying and can I find a match? Yeah, thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, we were talking about the differences of when you're talking to people without a faith and those that do, and the benchmark, your vertical line.
Yeah.
And somebody said that actually the people of faith generally feel, rightly or wrongly, that they've got a higher benchmark to meet up to.
Yep.
So then the question comes of guilt.
Yep.
And I don't think that word's come up yet this morning, but people will often find themselves in a difficult place because they're feeling guilty. And often it's the people of faith because they've got a higher standard they're trying to aspire to. Whereas the people without faith are on a sort of pick and mix, and they don't have to justify why that standard applies in that part of their life and that standard applies in another part of their life. So they just pick and mix, and then you can't really argue with that, can you?
Yeah, I think guilt is such a big one, isn't it? Lots and lots of people experience guilt. I think not just people of faith experience guilt. And I think it's quite important. We've got a saying in our family. We're a Christian family, and we say we don't do guilt because we don't actually do guilt. There is therefore now no condemnation to those that are in Christ Jesus. We do repentance, we do godly sorrow, we change, but we don't do guilt because we've been set free from it. But if you don't have a faith, actually, you don't know that. And even if you do, some people who do have a faith, as you say, they feel the guilt of not matching up to whatever that standard is. I think it's worth exploring as well the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is usually around, I've done something wrong, or I've missed the mark in some way. I haven't come up to the mark. I've done something wrong. Shame says, I am wrong. It's a very much more identifying thing. It's not really about what we do or don't do. It's who we are at our core. And so many people are living with shame. They just feel rubbish. And they just feel there's something fundamentally flawed about them. What I love about the Christian hope is that actually it responds to our shame as well as to our guilt. But this is not that meeting. That's a different sermon. But yeah, thank you, girls. Somebody else had their hand. I will take one more, I think, before we're going to just move on to something else. Anybody else?
This is just to give you an experience of what was going on our table, but it's a huge question, this, isn't it?
It is. It's enormous.
One of the questions that came up was, well, who are chaplains anyway? I mean, we're not counsellors, we're not clergy or ministers, we're not evangelists. So who is this person that other people are coming to see? And we just talked a bit about the importance of listening, and really the importance of not jumping too much to telling people where they can get further help or this, that or the other, but simply being there for them. So there is an area of, I think, initial credibility where a relationship has to be established.
Yeah.
And it's like Ginny, who works for Samaritans, where it's a very clear-cut sort of relationship. Yeah. And very different experiences around the table as well, of how chaplaincy has worked as people have come to them.
Yeah.
So lots of questions and some very interesting sort of input as well.
Yeah, there is a lot to ponder on, isn't there? You perhaps go away and ponder some more. I think that idea of, well, who am I? As a chaplain, I turn up, who am I? And we know we're not counsellors, and we know we're not ministers, and we're not missionaries, or are we missionaries? You know, all that lies in it, doesn't it? I was telling the women in the break about... I've got a little book at home that I picked up a couple of weeks ago at a conference I went to. It's published by the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity, and it's called The Great Divide. And it's about faith in the workplace, having faith in the workplace. And Mark Green from the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity has written, I think he was the one who wrote it. And he talks about how churches have kind of developed a sacred secular divide in our heads somehow about what is fruitful for God, what is ministry. And we tend to think ministry is when we're serving in church, or we're involved in some kind of social action, or we're having evangelistic conversations. None of which, largely, we do at work. We don't have the opportunity. So their argument is, for most of the week, almost every day, for most of our lives, Christians go around feeling, I'm not being fruitful and I haven't got any purpose and I'm not actually doing what God wants me to do. And that can't be right, can it? Because God has got us in our workplaces, he's got us in our situations. And so their idea is, let's change that and let's think about how we model godly character, how we are being incarnational, if you like. How do we demonstrate something of the fruit of the Spirit to people, and just in the way we live? And that is purposeful and fruitful, even if it's not what we might traditionally call sacred ministry, you know. So when we're going out doing all this, it's just as important to God, and it's just as valuable and just as significant, and to be able to listen to people. That's what Jesus did most of the time, isn't it? He listened to people's stories. So when we do that, we're going in his name, and it's just wonderful. So well done for chewing on that one. I'm going to hand over to you now, because there's some things that you want to share. So, and then we'll take a coffee break, I think, after that.
Right, I thought it would be helpful for you to hear from a couple of our chaplains who are out there doing the work. And so the first person I'm going to introduce you to is Mike. This time last year, Mike, you'd come along to see what was going on. And I think he's now representing 2 GP surgeries as a result of contacts we made at last year's conference. So I've asked you to think about 2 things. A challenge. Yeah, you have that one.
Okay.
A challenge and a joy that you have with chaplaincy. We'll start with the challenge and we'll end with the joy.
The challenge is that you didn't give me a magic wand. People come with problems and issues, and I can't fix them. That's the problem.
And so how, when you leave the surgery and you've heard 2 or 3 people share those problems, how do you lay that down and go back next week to listen to more?
I'm there as a representative of God, and it's not my place to solve the problem. It's my place to be aware of the situation and hopefully bring a measure of hope to the patients that come. They hopefully go out with a sense of purpose and a sense of understanding, and no longer a sense of hopelessness. And so I then park it and I pray for them on my way home. I pray for them on my way there. Lord, who am I going to see today? And bless the conversation. And on the way home, thank you for that conversation. Bless them on their way.
Thank you. And can you tell us about your joy?
The joy is being there at a time when somebody is really struggling. For whatever reason, they have come to see a chaplain. Either their GP's recommended it or one of the medical staff, and they're not quite sure why they're coming. And they're making themselves vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, I'm there listening to them, but I'm also listening to God and getting insight from God as to how to respond and how to help them. Occasionally, I have the privilege of praying with them, but always it's the privilege of walking with them through the valley of the shadow of darkness and hopefully bringing them some light. Thank you very much.
So we're going to let you have a break time now. There are obviously lots of you. We're going to give you 20 minutes, so do make your way over, have a drink, start those respectfully curious conversations with each other.
I thought this was going to be the biggest challenge of the day, but you're really good, aren't you? You've all come back. Thank you so much. Right. I'm going to hand over to Susanna now.
Well done, everyone. So our second interview today is with Dawn. Dawn started at G Live just in September, their first chaplain. And so again, I've asked Dawn to think about the challenges and joys of chaplaincy and to think of just one of those to share with us. But we may let her diverge a little bit.
Just one?
So the first one, could you tell us about the challenge that you have found visiting G Live as their chaplain?
So one of the main challenges is the fact that it's, well, I've only been there 6 months. It's groundbreaking, it's pioneering. There's not been a chaplain there before. They invited us, Susanna built a relationship, which is great. So that, I love a bit of pioneering. Don't you like a bit of pioneering? Sorry, for those who are not anywhere near Guildford, my apologies. G Live is one of our theatres, it's one of the, sort of the biggest theatre in Guildford, and I'm chaplain to the staff, whether paid or voluntary. There are about 135 of them. I go in for 3 hours a week on a Wednesday afternoon when the coffee shop shuts, so it's just the staff. It's the main time in the week when there are lots of staff around and the evening staff come in, so I kind of overlap those who are there during the day and those who are coming in to help with the show in the evening. And I sit in the coffee shop, which is in the main foyer bit of, it's a huge foyer, and I sit there, yeah, so that's what I do there.
Okay. So going back to your challenge.
Challenge, yes. So that's the pioneering bit. And it is quite hard because nobody has done it before, but I was invited. But the lovely thing is, from the very first day that I walked in, I had such a lovely, warm greeting from absolutely all the staff. We're so pleased you're here. It's so lovely that you're here. And I think there's the whole thing about you come in and you might have your home life, which for some people isn't necessarily the best thing, and then you have work and you don't want to drop it all on work, or you might be just frustrated with work at the moment and you don't want to take that home. So Chaplain is very neutral and sit there and listen. But I'm moving on to my next challenge, which is, if that's all right, sorry. Which is the fact that I haven't been there very long. People don't know me. They don't know me at all. Actually, one does. She lived with us for about 4 years, so she does, which is great. I have someone in the camp, as it were, so people don't know me. But the lovely thing is, although no one knows me, they all came. Some of them have come to check me out. I mean, fair enough. Who is this weirdo? And so they've come and they've had a mini conversation, or we've kept it very superficial, or I chatted to them, because I go around to the theatre when I arrive and see who's around, have a little chat. Some of them say hello and scuttle away, and other of them go a little bit further, which is really lovely. So both of those challenges, and the joy in that is that some people are now, there's one person in particular who, oh, it's Wednesday, you're here, I'm going to come and talk to you. So I didn't expect anything for months and months, but already I have one person who comes regularly and sits and chats because they really need to chat. And that's a lovely thing to do with that. And the other joy is that I said that one of the challenges is pioneering, but actually one of the joys is pioneering as well, because I love it. I love to kind of, I always think of the Arctic, and you're kind of going along and you're cracking the ice as you go along to try and get to the next bit, and it's not easy, and then you come across a pillar of ice, and then how on earth do I attack that? And then it's, okay, Lord, help me. So it's a bit like that. I've heard it takes about 3 years to completely break the ground properly anyway, so I'm just kind of sitting and waiting and, expecting God to do his thing is the main way I approach it.
Thank you. I know you could talk. Do grab Dawn and talk to her later so she can share more of those joys and challenges. But we love the fact that you recognise that your challenge is also your joy, and that you are a real blessing to G Life. So thank you very much.
Bless you, Susan. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm going to hand you back to Helen, who is going to cover the next part of the morning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Part 2. Are you ready? So, if Nick could put my slide up for me. We're just going to go back to an earlier slide just to pick up a few points. I've had some nice chats in the break. It was really nice to talk to you. And I was thinking that idea of respect for curiosity keeps coming up, doesn't it? And coming around. We're going to show you in this next section, before we finish for lunch, there's going to be an opportunity to think about some models of conversation that we can have. And it can get a bit, if you talk about a model, it can start to feel a bit technical. It's not meant to feel technical. It's just meant to be a help. So I've got a friend who says, eat the meat and spit out the bones, which I think is great. So take what's helpful and just ignore the rest, and probably what's helpful will stick. And what isn't, you'll forget, and that's okay. So the other thing to say is some people have been taking pictures of the slides or struggling with the slides. You don't need to. We're going to send them to everybody, so you will get the slides afterwards for you to reflect on. And there is in the slides one group discussion that we're not doing because there isn't time. So you can have a play with that at some point in your groups or churches or families or teams, whatever you want to do. One of the things that came up in the break was talking with Esther about how freeing it is to not have to have all the answers. It really is, isn't it? It's really, really freeing to not have to have the answers. Part of my psychotherapy training donkeys years ago was in a model called solution-focused therapy, which isn't what it sounds like. It sounds like you just search for solutions and hand them out. That's not really what it is. It's more about exploring together what's already working in a person's life and sort of learning how to bottle that and grow it rather than only focusing on problems. But one of the key phrases that I learned when I was studying solution-focused therapy, and it's stayed with me in all my interactions, I think, is this idea of being in what the guy who wrote Solution Focused Therapy is a guy called Steve DeShazer, and he calls it being in the one down position as the practitioner. So in psychoanalytical psychotherapy, for example, the practitioner would be in the one up position. So the practitioner is the expert and the patient is not. It's a bit like that in old school teaching. The teacher is in the one up position, so the teacher has the answers and is the expert, and the class is not. But in solution focused therapy, and I think it's great in chaplaincy, the practitioner is in the one down position. So the person you're talking to is an expert on them. They know them really well. Well, they're struggling to find out about them, but they have something to bring to that. They're not looking to you to be an expert with all the answers. And I love just adopting that one down position. Tell me about that. What's that like? And not actually having to have an answer. Not having to prove that I know what it's like, or prove that I've understood it, but just having an inquiring attitude. It's so lovely. And there was a phrase that Henry Nouwen said. He said, deep listening is the heart of spiritual hospitality. And in any kind of hospitality, if you're the host, your aim is for your guests to be as comfortable and as safe and secure and cared for as possible. That's your aim. It's not to show off, is it? It's to look after your guest. I've got a friend in my church who sees herself as a host in the world on Jesus' behalf, and I'm in awe of her life. She sees every single person she meets, basically, as a guest. And she makes it her business to make it all right for them and to make sure they're comfortable and everything is attended to. Isn't that lovely? It's just not about answers. It's just about, can I get you a chair? Or do you want a cup of coffee? Everyone that she meets, she's in that kind of hosting role. And that's so lovely. The Henry Nouwen. So Henry Nouwen said, deep listening is the heart of true spiritual hospitality. So being a host is about being in the service of the guest, isn't it, really? And I can't remember what the other thing was I said. About the one down position, being in the one down position, not needing to be the expert. It's very freeing. Oh, in the name of Jesus. She talks about being a host in the world in the name of Jesus. Yeah. She's a host when she's driving, after you. You know, she doesn't care if people cut her up. No, you go. And it's just lovely to be with her, because you just feel attended to all the time. I want to be like her when I grow up, I think. It's nice having people like that in your life, isn't it? People you say, I want to be like you. And I've realised I've never seen her and Jesus in the same place at the same time, so I'm thinking maybe they are the same person. Have you got people in your life who you think, that's just got to be Jesus? Have you got people like that? I've got a few like that. I think, wow, that's amazing, how lovely. Anyway, enough of all that. Let's move on. I'm going to introduce you to some models of spiritual conversations. So this is the first one. Just ways to help people think about their spirituality. This comes from Margaret Silf. Some of you may know Margaret Silf. She is an Ignatian practitioner. This book, by the way, is quite a lovely discipleship book if you want to take yourself through it. She describes it herself as one of those books that you can just maybe read a couple of pages and then spend months pondering on how to make that work in your life, and then you read a couple more. It doesn't matter, it's not a cover-to-cover kind of thing. But it's talking about the Ignatian spiritual disciplines and how those take us deeper and deeper into our true self and finding God. So it's a Christian model. It comes from Jesuit and Ignatian spirituality. But it's a really lovely model. I'll just put the books there. People seem to have put them there to take pictures, so that's fine, you can do that. Just don't take the books. Take the pictures, but not the books. So she has this concentric circles model, which is quite a nice model, I think, for helping people to have conversations about getting to the heart of themselves, at the heart of what their spiritual needs might be. So these circles, she talks about, in the outer circle, the questions are all around for the individual, where am I? And these are factors about yourself that you can't change. So well, you can change the colour of your hair. But things like the colour of your eyes or your physical appearance or where you were born, who your parents are, most of your past, all that kind of stuff that's true about you, the facts about you, come under in that circle, the where am I? So we can be really interested in those things about people. Tell me about yourself. Who have you got in your life? That's a question I ask a lot of all my patients. Who have you got? Where did you grow up? Got any brothers and sisters? Mum and dad still alive or not? Who else is in your life? What do you do for a living? So the positional stuff of our life is great for opening up the conversation and just hearing that. And it's amazing. Remember what I said at the beginning about what do we listen for? Even when you're having those kind of conversations, if you're listening for the spiritual needs, you'll hear them, even at that outer circle. If you're listening carefully, you will hear what the longings are, or what the need is. And I was talking in the break, sorry, I'm just distracted now about the conversation in the break. We were talking, Esther and I, about how great it is to be needy. How it's quite essential to be needy. Having needs causes us to need each other and God. If we were made so completely self-sufficient and put together that we never had any needs, we'd be really lonely and we wouldn't relate to God and we wouldn't relate to each other. So God kind of made us with built-in needs, which I think is quite kind of him, actually. God is kind, isn't he? Always. So the where am I conversation is just getting to know the person. It's quite an outside factors situation. And then gradually the conversation might move in a little to how am I? And this is where we're thinking about what choices am I making? Am I happy with the choices I'm making or not? What kind of mood am I in? Is there anything I want to do about that? What are my decisions? What are my values? In that how am I circle, I think helps us to find the straight line for people. Because we're thinking then about, well, what are your options and how are you making decisions? Is there anything you want to change? What choices are you making? How are you reacting to what's happening to you? So where am I looks a little bit more at what is happening. How am I looks at how am I doing with what's happening? How am I getting on with what's happening to me? And we're curious and interested in all of that. And then you come in, and this book, if you wanted to do it in your own life, it takes you into this, right in the middle, who am I? And that is when everything is stripped away and no one is looking, and it's just me or just me and God, who am I then? And again, that really brings the vertical line of the gap model into sharp focus. Who am I then? And for some people, that really highlights a spiritual need. I don't know. I'm lost. I'm really stuck. I'm really sad. I don't know who I am. And you're straight then into a conversation with someone. That sounds really desolate. And you can begin to open that up with somebody. So who am I? And if you know God for any length of time, he takes us, I think, inward in these circles. He takes us in, doesn't he? A few years ago, I started to ask myself the question, who shows up when I show up? It's quite a nice question. You ask yourself, when I show up, who's coming? And I ask my patients this, I say to them, when you show up, who is it that's coming? So for me, when I show up, I hope, when I show up, someone helpful turns up, someone safe turns up, someone with joy and hope turns up, someone who's willing turns up. Recently, I went through quite a difficult season in my life, and I realized actually when I show up, it's a cynic who turns up, someone who's critical and a little bit spiteful, and God really just spoke to me about, I don't want to be that person, I need to do some sorting myself out. Because when I show up, hopefully, it's someone who manifests the fruit of the Spirit and can demonstrate something of what God has done in my life. Who are you when you show up? But if you ask the people you're working with, that question. You can't really get to that question until you've done the outside circles, but when we get to that question, that's really revealing of what do we really, really need? What do we long for? What do we hope for? What is our place in the world? I wonder if maybe a case study would help us. So I recently was working with someone who I'm calling Agatha, and she gave, I didn't ask for this, but at the end of her sessions with me, she gave me an A4 typed out, written evaluation reflection of her time, which is really unusual. I don't very often get that. She came with it. She said, I thought you might want to know what I've thought, so here it is. And she said, and you can tell people about it if you want to. You can use it wherever you like. So Agatha's story is being told. She'd completed a series of sessions, really, during which she'd been on that journey inwards. She'd been on a journey of to get to self-acceptance. And sometimes it had been really, really painful. We hadn't intentionally followed this model. Or I wasn't conscious of it, but actually her reflection showed me that that's the journey she'd been on. So she'd started by telling me the facts of her life, and she'd come inwards gradually. And this model had actually perhaps been a guide for her. So she professes no religious faith, and really it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to use the language of faith with her to explore the situation. She didn't have that language and didn't need to use it. So I realized that her story broke down, even the way she told it, into these three spaces. So where am I? I'd invited her to tell me some of her life story. She'd been raised in a very high-achieving family. She'd excelled in her educational field. She'd been very feisty and independent, and she'd married against, really, the guidance and wisdom of her family, who didn't like the man that she was marrying, but she was determined, saw herself as a determined and capable woman. So she'd married this guy and ended up living abroad, and then discovered actually that what she got into was a very abusive relationship. She was in danger of her life. At one point in her life, she'd got children by that time. She feared for her life, she feared for their life. And she'd had to escape, and she'd literally had to escape in the middle of the night and run away. She'd come back to this country. Her family didn't help her because they said, well, you know, you made your bed, lie in it, kind of thing. So they were not supportive. So the where am I was this story, and she was just so sad about it. And yet she had raised her children, and they were doing well in life, and they had good jobs, and they had families. She'd really worked hard, and she'd made a success of all of that. She devoted her whole life, really, to their safety and their well-being because she didn't want them to experience what she'd experienced. We then got into, well, how am I? That how am I circle, what's really going on? And she presented in great despair, great distress. She'd got this huge sense of loss and disappointment in her at that time because one of her children, her son, had an affair and was leaving his wife and her grandchildren. Well, he wasn't leaving them, but he was leaving his wife, so he was leaving the matrimonial home. And she came really because she was beside herself with worry about this. She couldn't cope, and she couldn't forgive him, and she was furious with him. How could he be so selfish? How could he be so reckless? What was going to happen to these grandchildren? She couldn't sleep, she couldn't eat. She was in despair, furious with him. He was selfish and unreasonable. And if we weren't careful, we could have spent all our sessions talking about him because she had so much to say against him, really. But I was trying to talk about her. I asked about what arrangements was he making with his wife, and it was all very amicable. Actually, it was going to be okay. He was going to see the children very regularly. He was going to be in their life. She was having a hard time accepting that sometimes that happens in families. You know, it's sad, but sometimes it does happen in families, and sometimes the children are okay. And I wondered with her about this struggle that she'd got. And I wondered about how she was struggling, really, to accept that her son was responsible for his own choices and their consequences, and that this was not a reflection on her or a failure on her part. She was struggling with that. She realised that she felt he'd let her down. She felt that he had disrespected all the sacrifices that she had made at great personal cost to provide him a life that was free from terror and distress. She'd put everything into that, and she was so cross with him that he was not going to live this perfect little stable life that she'd longed for. So we spent a long time talking about how she could separate that out. How could she see that he's responsible for his choices? She's done her part, she's done well, and could she give herself credit for that? But at the same time, trust him to his own choices. Could she release him from a debt? Which is what forgiveness is, isn't it? We release the person from the debt. It's quite a nice way to think about it. Somebody once said, when you forgive someone, it's like writing off a debt, but then you realise it's yourself that you've set free from it, which is also true. You release them from the debt, and then you find, oh, actually, I'm free from it too. So that was all the how am I conversations we had. And then who am I? Gradually, she began to untangle all these expectations, and she saw that it was her own fear and her own trauma that was coming back and impacting on her relationship with her children. And she began to think she needed to cut herself free from having to be responsible for their well-being every minute. And in the little summary that she gave me, she said that she said, I have had really meaningful conversations about the power of forgiveness, about managing my expectations, and about releasing myself from guilt and shame. I have given myself permission to grieve. I've learned to differentiate between my children and my grandchildren, and to celebrate that my grandchildren are safe and loved, and that I've given my son enough to be able to still do that for them. Wow. We were just working inwards, really, so that she could accept herself. We both needed a bit of courage for that journey, and I'm aware that in my work, I have the luxury of a number of sessions with people, which you may not always have. But we both needed courage. I needed the courage to sit and follow this rambling, self-deprecating kind of rubbish that was coming out of her, and all this anger about her son. I had to be brave enough to risk. I'll just hear that. I think I'll just listen to that. I'm not going to try and fix that. Let's just see what happens if I pay attention. And she kind of got there herself. People don't always. Sometimes just go round. But she did get there herself, which was amazing. And even though God was not in those conversations, she knew they'd been spiritual. Especially when she talked about learning to forgive, which I think is a deeply spiritual activity. So Margaret Self helps us, that model. And it's okay to start with the outside sofa, but we have to start there, and that's okay. That's an okay conversation to be having. It's a fruitful conversation to be having. If you ask about a person's life, you might be the only person who genuinely is interested in it or has been for ages, and that might be enough. Sometimes by the grace of God we can come inward, but we don't always. So that's the first model I wanted to show you. Then the next one, I'm going to give you 3, and then you're going to have a group discussion to sort of just think about them a little bit. Helping a person to think about their spirituality. I think Sylph's model is a great way to sort of talk about integration. We find the gap really with that model. But sometimes what we're doing is something a bit more like helping the person find out for the first time what are their inner desires and what are their values in the first place. They might never have thought that way before. John Fisher is an Australian psychologist who has identified these 4 domains of personhood, which is quite a useful little model, if you like boxes. It's quite a nice way of thinking about personhood. So he calls these aspects of personhood domains. There's a personal domain, a communal domain, an environmental domain, and a transcendental domain. So you're interested in finding out what a person will say about themselves in each of those domains. If you want a fuller version of the questions that go with these domains, if you go to the ACGP website, acgp.help.org, I think. Just Google ACGP, you'll find it. One of the tabs that we have on the website is called the handbook. And in the handbook, there's a whole load of documents about running a service and being a GP chaplain. And in that handbook, there are the 4 domains of Fisher listed with all the questions that go with the domains. So if you like this idea and you want to know what kind of questions do I ask, here they are. So I think a lot of people get referred to services like mine because they just need more time to explore, really. And this model is good for opening it up. So you're thinking about the personal domain of a person, which is a bit like the outer circle of Sylph, I guess. What are you good at? What gives you strength? How do you nurture your own spirit? So tell me about you, really. What are your likes and dislikes? What are your skills? What are your talents? Getting to know the person. The communal domain is about connectedness. Who have you got? Who do you connect with? Who is important in your life? Who do you trust? How do you receive love? How do you know? So that all that connecting stuff. Again, it's just stuff to be curious about people, isn't it? We're just interested in finding out about these people. The environmental domain is the domain that John Fisher calls the domain of awe and wonder. So tell me about your favourite place. What would be your most nurturing environment? Where'd you love to be? If you could create a perfect world, what would it be like? I've got a favourite place. Well, I've got lots of favourite places, but my most accessible favourite place is about a 5-minute drive from my house. And bear in mind, I live in Birmingham. It's a park. Well, it's a nature place. It's not an organised park. It's got streams and lakes and woodland area and loads and loads and loads of wild birds. And it's sandwiched in between 2 dual carriageways that are heading out of Birmingham. But once you get in there, you don't know that you forget about the dual carriageways. You can't even hear them, actually, especially when all the trees are in leaf, you can't hear them. And I go as often as I can because it changes so many times. And every time I go there, it nurtures my soul. I love to be by water. I love the lakes. I love the wild birds. Just now, the wild garlic is beginning to come. Give it another couple of months, the whole place will be white with garlic and it will smell so gorgeous. The bluebells come about the same time. The daffodils are out at the moment. Then the wild garlic will disappear and little pockets of flowers come up and the leaves are all coming on the trees. And you see nuthatches and tree creepers and herons and egrets and loads of robins and woodpeckers, and it's just fabulous. And it's just on the edge of Birmingham. Lee So's Park. I've forgotten your name, sorry, the guy who was Mike, yeah. Do you imagine whether you know Lee So's Park near Hales Owen? But that's where I go. That's my favourite spot. And it's just gorgeous. I really missed it in lockdown when you couldn't drive to your place because it's just a little bit too far for me to walk. But the very day they said, you can now drive for your daily walk, that's where I went. And if you're listening to me, if you're listening for my spiritual needs, if you're listening to learn about me, you will have heard all sorts of interesting things about me from me telling you about Lee So's Park. And it's the same when you ask people about their environment, what gives them awe, a sense of awe and wonder. And the final domain is the transcendental, or the other. What brings you peace? What really lifts your spirit? What's your greatest mystery? What do you think the universe is all about? So relating out of yourself. It's a really lovely model because you can dip in and out of this. It's not linear. It doesn't really matter where you go, which box you start in. It might just depend on what the person wants to talk about. So you can just talk yourself and your person through all those things. Esther and I I've realised we've had a really important conversation in the break because I'm going to quote Esther. We're going to quote this conversation with Esther again. We talked about, that's gone out of my head now. I just remembered something we said and now it's gone. Oops, I'll come back to it. I've forgotten forgotten completely what it was. Oh yeah, I remembered. We talked about being bilingual and biaural in our conversation. So bilingual means I can talk the language of my faith and my convictions unashamedly, but I have to also learn the language of the other person. So, for example, I'm working with a person at the moment, and their language of spirituality is all about nature. For another of the people I've worked with, their language was actually all about art and craft and what that meant. Someone else wanted to tell me all about the books they'd ever read. And did I know any of the authors? That was their kind of language. Now, my language is often scriptural, or it's full of the joy of the Lord, or it's, you know, the hope that I have in Jesus. But I can hang on to that. I don't have to forfeit, don't throw that out of the window. But I have to learn also to not only understand, but speak the language of the other person. And John Fisher helps us to do this, I think, because we're inquiring about a person. But we also need to be biaural, which means while I'm listening to you, I'm also listening to God. And I think it was as I was listening to my patient the other day that I heard God say, she needs a hug. Because I hadn't thought of that. That wasn't something that I'd planned. So just fitting that in with this model, I think it's quite helpful. We take an interest in the things that we can't see by looking at the things we can, by listening to the things that we can see. It's that more than, I think, that helps us with that. I think Fisher helps us explore the person's sense of themselves, community, enjoyment and satisfaction, all that stuff. So to illustrate this, I'll tell you about Robert, someone who came into my service, very shy and not at all comfortable really at first with speaking to me. His GP had said it might help him to talk about his anxious thoughts. He said he didn't really know what to say, he didn't know why he'd been sent to a chaplain to talk about his anxious thoughts. And he said he's not really a talker anyway. So at the beginning, it felt a bit like pulling teeth, to be honest. It was quite hard work. So I just sort of started the conversation to try to get to know him a little bit. So I asked him things like, what's your favourite thing? What do you like doing the most? And I kind of followed him around in that conversation, just kind of any questions from any of those boxes that I could think of. I just kept popping out and see what he said. Eventually, he was able to tell me that what he really was longing for was a meaningful relationship. And he'd never actually had a meaningful romantic relationship. But that's what he wanted. And we then got into the who shows up when you show up conversation. Because he was looking for the perfect woman, but he didn't know what kind of man he was. And he kept being disappointed because he couldn't sustain a relationship. And it wasn't really because there was anything wrong with the women as such. It was just that he didn't really know who he was. He didn't really know what he was offering to anyone. I don't think it was a very profound encounter, to be honest. He came 3 times. He didn't have, I wouldn't say, any epiphanies or any great depth of conversation. But he did talk. And after having come, first of all, saying, I'm not a talker, these boxes helped me to get him talking. And at the end, he said, I think I'll be all right now. I'll manage for myself now. It's okay. Thanks for listening. That's all. I think that was quite spiritual, though, because I don't think anybody really listened to him before, mostly because he didn't know what it was he wanted to say. But we give him an opportunity to think about something to say. He could. That was quite kind, I think. Also, there's a guy called Mark that I met, a very deeply sad and troubled man. He'd been abused by his family in quite an unusual and unexpected way. He'd had a terrible trauma several years before that had really impacted on him and left him really hurting, angry, estranged from his family. And I quickly realized, as I was talking to him about using these domains, I was just finding out about him and I heard his story. Quite quickly I realized actually what he needed was some underlying trauma work. He'd been on the end of a very traumatic incident that had nearly killed him within his own family. And I realized my service was not the service to kind of unpack all of that. Thankfully, we've got a trauma therapist in our practice. So I suggested referring him to the trauma therapist, and he agreed, and so he was on the waiting list. And while he was on the waiting list for the trauma therapist, he just kept coming. And he kept on telling me the same story over and again. He kept telling me, which is what trauma survivors often do, he kept telling me the story of this incident, and I just kept hearing it, feeling very inadequate, knowing he just needs to get, it's next door, the next room where the trauma guy just needs to get there because I don't know quite what to do with all this. And we got to the last session. He was going to go and see the trauma therapist. We got to that very last session. And we were just reflecting together, and I was saying how nice it had been to meet him, and I was sorry that his life had been so hard, and I wished him well with the next stage of his therapy. We were just doing that kind of conversation. And I just said, you know, because I realise, Mark, it really hurts, doesn't it? And he said, I can't believe it. He said, yes, Helen, but it hurts less here. I think that's probably the best feedback I've ever had in absolutely years of being a psychotherapist and a chaplain. Yes, but it hurts less here. And we hadn't done any trauma work. We'd done nothing at all, really, except chat about his horrible life. But that was healing, restorative for him, and I'm just so grateful. I think that's a spiritual conversation. I'm looking at the time and realizing I am going to run over a little bit. I'm just looking at the back for an okay. I've just got one more model to show you and a little bit of group work. I'm sorry, I just want to try and help you with this. This third one comes from Hilary Garraway's work in holistic CBT, so cognitive behavior therapy. Hilary Garraway is a psychologist who worked in London for a long, long time and developed a model called holistic CBT because she wanted, she's a very, very experienced cognitive behavior therapist working with very severely mentally ill patients in secondary care in the NHS, and also a Christian, and she wanted to find a way to bring spirituality into cognitive behavior therapy. Hats off to her. And she managed it, and she kind of has developed a whole model of holistic CBT. And this is just one little exercise, one example that I use in my practice, and I think it's lovely. And if you have an opportunity, the person who worked in the theatre, forget where you are, for example, if you have an opportunity, if you're sitting with someone and there's maybe a table in front of you, and you could get pens out and pencils and crayons or anything like that. If someone's artistic, this is brilliant. It's so lovely. So we just use a tree to describe our life and our spiritual needs. It's just brilliant. So the roots are the stabilizing influences in our life, the history, the values we have. Branches are our goals and our desires, so just talk about those. And as we're drawing branches on the tree, where do we want to go? What are we hoping for? What are we going to do next? The leaves represent significant people in our lives because they help to draw the nourishment. Flowers are what Hilary calls the good to be alive moments, because flowers just come, don't they? They don't last a long time. Just the little moments of joy. Fruit, our talents and our skills, what are we good at? And once you've got all that together, then you can see, okay, what is the trunk then? This is the who am I? So who is this person because of all these wonderful influences? And maybe there are other trees, which is the community that we belong to. I had a lovely time with a patient a couple of years ago, a girl called Kirsty. She's an international student at Birmingham, at one of the universities in Birmingham. She was homesick and lonely. And she'd been dabbling with university life, and not all of it really made any sense to her. She didn't quite understand British student life very well. And her sister had recently died back home, so she was missing her. So she told me she liked art, so I suggested we did this exercise. So she came for a few sessions, and each time she drew a bit more of her tree. And she coloured it all in, and she took it really seriously, and she described all the different aspects really well. And every now and then she'd come back and she'd go, I've thought of another leaf. Or I had a flower last week, you know, and she'd tell me about that. She was very artistic, actually. She did the best tree ever. It was really clever. I've only got felt pens and A4 paper in my office, but, you know, she did really, really well. And she just found it renewing and strengthening, and it just helped her remember who she was, actually, and she didn't feel quite so alienated from the world because she got a bit grounded again. She really enjoyed it. She took photos of every stage so that she could remember what it all meant as she went along. And it helped her to decide, regarding university, which clubs to go to and which not to go to. She got loads of invitations. It helped her to decide who was she going to be friends with and who was she not going to be friends with, because she was thinking about all these influences in her life, and it just kind of strengthened her, really. So those three models, the concentric circles or the boxes or the tree, different ways to think about things. And you can think about Agatha and Robert and Mark and Kirsty and just the work that they did with these models. And it's, again, not about having answers, not about having a particular goal in mind, but just about helping people think about themselves and how they relate to the world and what matters in life, really. So, if it's okay, I know we're running a bit late, but can I gobble some time? Thank you. I'd like you to go back into your groups and just for 20 minutes, discuss these models, actually. Have a chat together about them. Which one appeals to you the most or the least? Any ideas why? And share any models of conversation that you use, that you find helpful. So this is the kind of the toolkit stuff, really. So just get together and have a chat about what you liked or didn't like about what I've said, or is there anything that you regularly do? And after 20 minutes, we'll just take a little bit of feedback again in case there's any brilliant ideas in the room that we can all steal. So just off you go and do that for a bit, and then I'll round it up at the end of that. Thank you. Noel, have you got a mic? Great, thank you. Okay. Well, again, you seem very engaged. That was really nice to watch. Any thoughts? Any feedback? Anybody want to share from any of your groups? Noel's got the mic. If you put your hand up and then just let us know what was meaningful, what was helpful, what were you learning? Anything anyone wants to say?
I so enjoyed extending the tree metaphor to then an image of a tree coping in a storm.
Lovely.
A tree needing to be pruned.
Yep.
A tree with different fruit and different seasons. I just found that
Lovely.
really rich.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So
wonderful.
thank you,
well
Jen.
done. Yeah. I once it took hours to make like a spiral bound flip-over book of laminated photographs of trees in all sorts of seasons and all sorts of kinds. And I would invite people to choose which tree do you like and talk about that. And then I went to do some work in Mongolia with some educationalists over there, and I took it to show them, and they wanted it, and so they left it there. And I haven't had time to make another one since because it took so long to make it. So I've lost that. But looking through tree books is quite good as well. Yeah. Thank you. There's a hand here, Noel.
We thought the questions were actually really good to ask yourself first.
Yeah.
And that if you've been through that process, it makes it easier then to relate it to other people, the fact that you've done the work. But as a vicar, what struck me was they're the sorts of questions we should be asking during Lent. I mean, isn't that what Lent's about? Digging up and looking what's underneath. And so, well, maybe we should stick them into sermons on Sundays.
Very good. Very good. A few years ago, we did a course in our church, I don't know whether you've heard of it, called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. So we went through that course the year before the pandemic, and we learned to just slow down and be reflective. And it was really good preparation when we went into lockdown, we realised God had been kind to us to prepare us for a whole year with that. But with that course comes a devotional book called Day by Day, which is a 40-day devotional. And every Lent I do it, so I'm going through that again. And it's really good to help us it just helps you reflect inwardly on these things. It's very special. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, she's going to run. You're moving around the room.
I'm into staff fitness, you see. Right? Keep them on their toes. This is what I shared with our group here. As a workplace chaplain, it's not easy, although the models are good, it's not easy to sort of know which model to use, and whether you can use those models. Using the tree model in an environment where you're in a staff room, there's maybe 2 or 3 people, it could be used, but you might have 7 or 8, and there'll be people looking at you thinking, what the heck are you doing? So it's not necessarily appropriate. So it's that relationship that you need to build with the person to understand how you attack the conversation. I'm not saying physically attack, but the which conversational method you might want to employ with a particular person. And it's almost a case of, is it a mixture of some of them and trying to pick out the best track to open that person up to a conversation in the first place?
Absolutely, yeah. It can all be pick and mix, can't it, really? Mix and match and finding out what's going to work where and with whom. Yeah, well said.
Thank you. We did also talk about time. One of my personal challenges is to believe that, even a short interaction is valid in God's timing, because sometimes it can feel as though you can't offer enough in a short time. But we did talk about how any of these, if you just had one of them in your mind with one question, and to trust that God is there in that. And you, Sheila, you shared, didn't you, about something important that you'd done that you'd forgotten that was really important to someone else.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. Yeah, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hour-long sessions or whatever it is, I think any spiritual hospitality that we offer is worth it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think time pressure sometimes either makes us want to say more than we should, but it's this thing of just whatever opportunity is presented to you.
Yeah.
And I think it's beyond words sometimes.
Yeah.
And the sense of God with us in that moment, God with that person in front of us, and allowing God to do more than we can ever imagine. And releasing, letting go of said people if they've got to move on. And I'm not seeing that as losing something, but actually just maybe seeing that as a golden moment for them. Yeah. What you give to a person, a greeting, hello, are you well, are you okay? Might be the only time that somebody's asked them that in the day or in the week. And we've had some fun on here because we've got some cards with words on and some pictorial cards. And again, beyond the verbiage, allowing the visual connection as well. So, in a way, let's be creative, let's be prophetic, let's develop more of who we are as Christians in this.
Yeah, absolutely. What I love about this role is we can bring our whole self to it. So whatever floats your boat, you can bring to it, really, and that's just the joy of it. We don't have to fit ourselves into some special box to be able to do this work. And I think as well, freeing ourselves, as I said earlier, and I think the time constraint comes into this, freeing ourselves of having to have the answers and having to have had an encounter that somehow has achieved something. Let's just throw that out the window, because it's not what it's about, really. It's just about being there, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you. If there's no one else pressing, I'm just going to finish with I'm just going to miss that bit out. You'll see that slide when you get the slides. That's just about managing the tension of your own faith. But we're running out of time, so I want to just finish with a quick word about self-care, really. It's really important that we take care of ourselves when we're doing this work. So know yourself, get to know yourself. You know, engage in your own spiritual development. I liked what you said about maybe for Lent, take a season to be reflective. Find ways to have these conversations with yourself. And with other people who do you good. So remember, you're not on your own either. You're in a community. You're surrounded by people who do you good. You've got other trees, you know, in the park. So draw on them as well and just learn how to seek out those people who do you good. Maintaining the boundary of, you know, being fluent in your mother tongue of faith is really important, but being able and willing to learn to speak the language of the other person's experience is important. But in order to hold on to our kind of, what I call the mother tongue of your faith, you need to be investing in it, don't you? You need to be enriching yourself in your prayer life or in scripture or however you do it. Engage with really life-affirming and stabilizing resources. As you said, perhaps go through some of these domains and ask yourself your own questions. So just looking after yourself, handling your boundaries well. Somebody shared earlier about, you know, leave it to God. Or at the end of your time with people, being able to just leave it to God. If you work in a particular environment, rather than out on the streets or something, if you work in a room or a particular environment, I have found it quite helpful to develop a sort of ritual for the end of my time before I go home. So I'm very deliberate about closing the blind and locking the filing cabinet. And where I work, there are armchairs for me to sit, one for me to sit in and one for the patient to sit in. And I start the day by sitting in the patient chair and praying for them. And I end the day by sitting in the patient chair and just giving thanks to God. And that's important. And then I can lock the door, leave the building, and it's all with God. Otherwise, it would be overwhelming, wouldn't it, all these stories. So just stuff to look after yourself, really. That's how I wanted to end. And thank you ever so much for listening. I mean, that's basically it. I've really enjoyed meeting you, and I hope that you've found it helpful. So I'm going to hand back to Susanna now. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for coming all the way from Birmingham. And on behalf of everyone here, thank you. You have given us so much to think about and just given us space to remind us of the power of listening and how we are different in offering that. And that difference is such a blessing to share with others. And we have loved your stories. My name is Susanna, and I have the privilege of working with a pretty fantastic team of volunteer chaplains as the project coordinator. So I thought it would be helpful for me to give you an idea of what volunteers, chaplains get up to in Guildford and on the work we're currently doing. So our volunteers, they offer a listening presence. They're giving their time to others of any faith or none. They are motivated by their faith. They are not promoting their faith. They offer a non-judgmental, confidential and safe place in each of the placements where they work. They are trained, they're DBS checked, and they have supervision. And we work really closely with our volunteers and placements to get the right match. We want those matches to be sustainable. The relationship starts long before a chaplain might have time with the first client. We work with management, we need them to be on board, we want them to promote the service in that placement, whether it's with staff, their own volunteers, residents or patients. Every volunteer is different and every placement is different. So this morning Mike shared his experience, a little bit of what it's like to be a GP chaplain, and you've heard Helen talking about healthcare chaplaincy. GP chaplains have a structured role. The patients are referred by GPs. Each chaplain has 3 or 4 appointments a week of 50 minutes, and that appointment system all goes through the surgery. it's very structured. And then you have Dawn, who is going in every week to G Live. She's never quite sure what her week is going to look like. She doesn't know whether she's going to be having long and detailed conversations. But I think what we've learned today is the conversations that both are having are important. And so in both, it's all about, with every placement, it's all about building relationships before it starts and on an ongoing basis. And I think one of the main bits of advice is, being prepared to put that time into building those relationships for it to work. And it's different relationships. It's between volunteers, if you're working in pairs, within your team, with me working with the management and the volunteers. It's bringing all those things together to make them work. And so this past year has been a really encouraging one for volunteer chaplains. We now have our first school chaplain. So Michael visits George Abbott, very large secondary school with 200 plus staff, and he's visiting them weekly. You'll have heard from Dawn, that's G Live's first chaplain. We've started 2 new GP chaplaincies in Merrow Park and Austin Road with Mike. And we're just finalising plans to open another, which will bring the total to 6. We've now reached the stage where GP surgeries are coming to us, asking for a chaplain. If you think you may be that person, or you know someone who might be brilliant in that role, we would love for you to get in touch. We've also been fortunate this year to be one of the Mayor of Guildford's chosen charities. And we finished celebrating at the Mistletoe Ball. It was a fantastic fundraising event hosted by the Mayor and Guildford Philanthropy. And as part of the promotion for that ball, a short film was put together by a young girl called Charlie. And because of what we've been thinking about this morning, I thought I would share with you some of her language, her thoughts of what she thought about after she'd spent time with us. And she said, "Perhaps because I'm not particularly religious, I assumed their work wasn't something that would resonate with me. Talking to Mike about his role as a GP chaplain was a revelation. Watching him in action at Austin Road Surgery and seeing how people could be brought together at the Clock House, another one of our placements, gave me a deeper appreciation for the meaningful support GTCC provides. What struck me most was how accessible and inclusive they are. GTCC is there for anyone who needs someone to listen, to provide comfort, or to offer support in difficult times. Their work is rooted in compassion, care, and connection, and they make a genuine difference in people's lives." And I just thought that is what she saw as the role of a chaplaincy, someone on the outside. And I think that's not just for GTCC chaplains, it wasn't just for Mike, it's for chaplaincy general, that those words that she saw were rooted in compassion, care, and connection. So we continue to build relationships with long-standing placements. We have Bob and Jean, who go into the Clock House, a complex of retirement flats. Bev goes into Mulberry House, which is a hostel for homeless women. We have Rosamond in St Mary's, Quarry Street, which is a sanctuary right in the centre of our town. And we continue to have relationships with the police, both in the town centre and Mount Brown. We're looking ahead to have a chaplaincy space in one of our shopping centres and to having a team of volunteers there to support staff of nighttime venues and retail. If you think that that role excites you, or anything that you have heard today, you think, yes, I could do that, or you've got another idea, you're passionate about something else, please do come and talk to us, and we can see where those seeds take us from here. So our aims for this morning were for you to feel connected, encouraged, and inspired. And I really hope that we have been successful in at least one of those areas for each one of you today. I hope you've enjoyed meeting those people on your table. Please keep talking to others over lunch. Practice your respectful curiosity. I hope you find having a list of people attending today helpful, and please do use it. I think we're very aware of the range of experience we have in this room. We have chaplains who have been practicing for decades. We have people who have been doing it without really realising they're doing it, and people at the beginning of their journey. And we've had several requests in the last few months to provide support to chaplains who are working with other organisations. And whether it's because they're at the beginning of their journey or whether they're lone working, we want to be able to support there as well. Now, I work part-time. Our resources are limited, but if you live locally in the Guildford area, we would love to invite you to our monthly prayer meeting in St Mary's and other events that we could then hold as well to offer that networking support so that the conversations you're having today can continue and you are given that opportunity for that ongoing network, that ongoing support. If that would be helpful for you, please do let us know in the questionnaire that you'll be asked to fill in shortly. So basically, if you have any questions, don't leave without talking to me or Noelle or anyone else in a maroon fleece. If we don't know the answer, we will find someone who does. And as for encouragement and inspiration, Helen has given us so much to think about, to take away and process. But in the meantime, to finish, I'm just going to share a quote from an email I received just yesterday from someone who attended last year. And unfortunately, she can't be with us. But this is what she said. "I'm really gutted to miss it. Please could you include me on the distribution if you share notes from the day? And I wanted to thank you. The training you offered last year with Paul about chaplaincy being a tool for mission inspired me to offer chaplaincy at the sports centre where I work." And they said yes, exclamation mark. "I now go in once a week as a sports chaplain. Can't thank you enough for what you're offering, praying for God to be at work on Tuesday, stirring hearts, praying that what you offer will impact those who attend." And that is my prayer for you today as well. Thank you all for coming. I look forward to hearing where your journey takes you, so please do stay in touch. And I'm going to hand over to Noelle.
Just briefly, I just wanted to say, perhaps one of the things I found in pastoral ministry over the years is the laying things down being important as well. That we're often told, to carry each other's burdens. Well, I would say in chaplaincy, sometimes don't carry each other's burdens because actually it will incapacitate you. You'll be carrying so much, the weight will be too great. So those sort of routines at the end of sessions with people, that can be helpful to laying down and then going on with the rest of your week. Because otherwise it starts to impact on your life and on those that you love around you. I have a kind of a thing where if someone says, "Oh, can you pray for me?" I'll say, "Well, yes, I'll pray for you and I think remember you in my prayers over the next 2 weeks. But if you want me to pray beyond those 2 weeks, you need to ask me again." Because otherwise I'd have a list that was too long. So I would encourage you to find ways and means that it doesn't spill over. It's getting that balance, isn't it? Anyway, to finish, there are so many people I really would like to thank, but perhaps the two main people, after obviously the teas, coffees and sandwiches, and sound and video and all the rest of it, is Helen and Susanna as well, who's brought this all together. So could we give them just a round of applause? But thank you so much for coming. We've loved hosting this and we've loved you being here. And we really do pray God's blessing on each and every one of you here in the ministry and the whatever it is that God is calling you to, or God has already called you to, that it may be really a place of blessing. And those sort of deep roots of that tree that we were hearing about, may they go down deep and get lots of nourishment. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we're just so thankful for all that you do in our own lives. We recognise that life is chaotic and messy in so many ways, and we are as well. But perhaps that helps us to come alongside people, to bring them that space, that listening ear, that non-judgmental openness that they can share and find your blessing even in the stillness and the quiet. Help us today as we go from this place, and may the blessing of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit be with each and every one of us, now and always. Amen.
Volunteer Chaplains is a project run by GTCC which aims to support people by meeting them where they're at, listening to them and encouraging them. But what actually is a chaplain?
Excuse me, could I stop you just for a moment?
Can you tell me what you think a chaplain is?
A chaplain? Chaplain? There was a chaplain in Woking. He used to go around the town and in the various stores. Somebody who works in hospital.
Charlie Chaplain. Figuratively.
Church. I think it's probably something to do with the church.
Chaplains are usually attached to hospitals or universities or things like that.
At school, I've had chaplain teams.
The vicar at the church.
Church, I guess.
Minister of a church.
Church? Church.
I'm really not sure what a chaplain is.
I don't know. Doesn't know.
I think that's an angel, but I'm not sure.
Somebody who's presenting a gospel.
Somebody who cares.
Traditionally, chaplains are individuals of Christian faith attached to a particular institution like a naval ship, an army regiment or prison, there to offer emotional and spiritual support. Since 2008, we've been sending chaplains out to local businesses and organisations across the town, aiming to do exactly the same. They give a couple of hours a week and spend time with staff, patients or clients, depending on their placement. They build relationships and trust with those who they come alongside. Put simply, they are a listening ear. In the office, on our high street, at a bus station, at the courts, in a GP surgery, in retail, at the fire station. Our chaplains come from all walks of life, ranging in age from 29 to 87. They're not necessarily clergy, but are motivated by their faith to give time and listen to others in a safe and confidential space without judgment. Our chaplains are there for people to share anything and to unburden themselves with anything they may be worried about. It is often easier to be completely honest with a chaplain rather than close friends or family. If you would like to find out more about becoming a chaplain, then do get in touch and we can discuss the possibilities. We train all our chaplains and carefully match them with each setting. We all have times in our life when we're dealing with different kinds of losses, stresses and difficulties. Our chaplains are here for those times.